force that transcends the material world. And this is best explained by God. No other answer provides an adequate explanation for this phenomena, brothers and sisters and friends.
It is not normal and logical to think how amazing it is that the tide came in, sunk into the sand, and made an impression which looks like a footprint. Oh, that could happen. It's not impossible. But that's not how our brains function. The logic of our brains tells us we see that footprint, we assume that a human being stepped here. But those who say no, not necessarily, they will argue, for example, very easily, that if you take a bucket of paint and you throw it against the wall, it can splatter and look like a hand, or a head, or a foot. This can happen, and it's true. You look at the clouds, sometimes the clouds take a shape, you say, that looks sort of like a head. Looks like somebody I know. Or a foot, or a hand, or something. It happens. However, we say, if you put in that bucket colors, your primary colors, yellow, red, blue, add some white and black, stir it up, and then throw it against the wall, what are the chances of a Mona Lisa coming out of that? Now the atheist will say, possible. It's possible. If you throw it enough times, you have enough paint, eventually, one time, it could happen. What does our minds tell us? No way. The first time you try is like the last time you try. It's all the same. But the atheist illogically will say, no, it's possible. And they will even give you a mathematical possibility. 1 to the minus billion zeros, but still it's 1. But common sense tells us, no, it's not going to happen. That Mona Lisa came from a designer designing it, deliberately adding colors, etc. to create this. It doesn't happen by accident. Or, as they say, we're all a product of what? The Big Bang. What is the Big Bang? It is an explosion which makes atomic nuclear reactions seem like a cough. A massive bang. Now imagine, we take an atomic bomb and we drop it in a junkyard. What are the chances after that explosion that a Rolls Royce comes out? Engine purring, door half open, just come and take me. What are the chances of that? The atheists will say, it's possible. You drop enough bombs in enough junkyards, eventually that's going to happen. Is that logical? Is that reasonable? And we say, no, this is illogical. All of our common sense and experience says no. No way. They like to put it this way. If you put 100 monkeys in a cage and you give them 100 typewriters, in our case 100 Arabic typewriters, and you let the monkeys jump up and down on the keys, beating it with their heads, their elbows, toes, fingers, everything, eventually one of them will type out the whole Quran in Arabic for you, from Fatiha until Nas. Or they give the Bible from Genesis to Revelations. One of them is just going to just beat away and it's just going to pop out the whole of the holy book. This is what they say. Give them enough time, enough paper, replace the keys when they get worn out. One of them will eventually do it. We say, no. Common sense says, no. Design indicates a designer.
أجمل الكتب اللي قريتها كتاب اسمه There is a God، يعني هناك إله، لشخص اسمه أنتوني فلو. أنتوني فلو هو أحد أساتذة الفلسفة في جامعة أكسفورد، وأنتوني فلو الحقيقة هو أحد أهم الملحدين يمكن في تاريخ العالم، من خلال أبحاثه في الإلحاد وأبحاثه الفلسفية ألحد يمكن عشرات الآلاف من الناس أو مئات الآلاف. اداهم مقلب كلهم في 2004 وكتب كتاب هناك إله، أعلن أنه أصبح يؤمن بوجود الإله. الله، هو في ناس ما بتؤمنش بوجود إله؟ طبعا ده كتير جدا للأسف من الناس لا تؤمن بوجود إله ولا تؤمن بوجود خالق. يقول لك طب احنا جينا منين؟ لا، جينا بالصدفة. وطبعا كلمة صدفة دي كلمة مضحكة شوية. ليه؟ لأنه هو مش بس إن إحنا ما جيناش بالصدفة، لا، ده ما فيش ولا حاجة في الدنيا بالصدفة، كل حاجة بتقدير ربنا. ربنا سبحانه وتعالى بيقول إن كل شيء خلقناه بقدر، كل شيء بتقدير ربنا. ليه ما فيش مرة للناس اللي بيقولوا إن العالم ده جه بالصدفة، ما فيش مرة بذرة المانجا طلعت شجرة تين بالصدفة؟ ولا مرة. ما فيش مرة شجرة العنب نزلت لنا كوسة أو بطيخ، ولا مرة بالصدفة، لأن ما فيش حاجة في الدنيا دي بالصدفة أبدا. أحب أرد على الناس اللي بتدعي عدم وجود الخالق بكلمة قالها فيلسوف عظيم فرنسي اسمه رينيه ديكارت، وبالمناسبة هو كان مهندس. رينيه ديكارت بيقول أنا أشك في وجود الله، بس طالما أشك إذن أنا أفكر، طالما أنا أفكر إذن أنا موجود، طالما أنا موجود يبقى أنا اتخلقت، طالما أنا ما خلقتش نفسي يبقى حد تاني خلقني، وهو ده الله، هو ده الخالق. فقاده الشك إلى الإيمان. الحقيقة التفكير بتاعه ده بيختصر في آية جميلة جدا من آيات القرآن الكريم، وهي آية قصيرة جدا. قال عنها جبير بن مطعم بن عدي إن هو كان داخل المدينة في أسرى بدر، أسر في معركة بدر، في غزوة بدر، وداخل المدينة قال فدخلت المدينة وسمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي في صلاة المغرب بالآية التالية: أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون؟ هم اتخلقوا من غير خالق ولا هم خلقوا نفسهم؟ يقول جبير بن مطعم بن عدي لما سمعت هذه الآية كاد قلبي يطير. أنا كنت خطير، لأن المعنى الكبير اللي شرحه رينيه ديكارت ده موجود في آية قصيرة جدا وصغيرة جدا: أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون. أنا عايز أقول
Professor Anthony Flew of England and Reading University is the world's foremost academic atheist over the last 50 years and the author of more than 30 books. His first debate with former atheist-turned-Christian C.S. Lewis in 1950 in Oxford, England, was the first time he advanced his argument for atheism. He later wrote a paper titled Theology and Falsification. The paper became the most widely reprinted philosophical publication of the last half-century and a key foundation for atheists and agnostics who advanced materialist evolutionism. Flew's main theses were that the universe is eternal, it has always existed and always will, that life is a random process, the result or accidental product of chemical interactions. And third, the existence of God is a self-contradiction, and evil is not compatible with the existence of God.
That is to say, we start and stop with the universe itself, with the everyday world of common sense and common experience, and with those hidden mechanisms of that world which are progressively revealed by the advance of science.
But now it is the advancement of science itself that has changed the mind of Flew and some scientists. At a recent summit at New York University, Flew changed his position and now believes in God as the creator of the universe.
It is all a matter of the enormous complexity by which the results are achieved, which look to me like the work of intelligence.
Flew discussed the points with Professor Gerald Schroeder, who was with the Weizmann Institute of Jerusalem and MIT, and Professor John Haldane of the University of St. Andrews. Flew turns to various discoveries of science to prove his point. From the fossil records showing the sudden appearance of a fully developed life to the emergence of visual consciousness across the animal kingdom to the basic need for reproduction. But it is the manifestation of life written in DNA and the transcription of DNA to RNA and RNA into protein and the subsequent process of protein folding that makes the best case for flu.
What I think that the DNA material has done has shown by its almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which lead to produce this being, that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements to work together.
As for the battle between evolution versus creation in the classrooms, it seems it may never end, but it may be explained best by re-quoting Flew.
Which looked to me like the work of intelligence.
What were some of the factors that prompted you to, in recent years, reconsider atheism and to come to the conclusion that that there is a intelligence?
It's been entirely these, I suppose, biological discoveries and discoveries about the chemistry.
So
these things.
The complexity and...
yeah, the integrated complexity argument.
Now, when you talk about the integrated complexity,
yeah.
Is it the unlikelihood of that developing naturalistically, the first complex integrated biological system? Is that where the problem you saw?
Well, yes, because after all, there is a problem about even, well, of physical nature. There's it's if the integrated complexity of the physical world is a good reason, as Einstein clearly thought it was, of believing that there was an intelligence behind it, then this argument applies a fortiori with the inordinately greater integrated complexity of the living world. It seems to me this is just obvious that that argument is much stronger now.
And this was one of the factors that led you to conclude there must be an intelligence?
Yeah. It was accepting Einstein, who after all was the person who's qualified to judge, and seeing that a fortiori this applied where, of course, Einstein didn't have any authority at all and wasn't inclined reasonably enough to talk about it.
One of the main reasons why people are religious is because they're persuaded by the apparent design of living things, and that's completely destroyed by Darwin. If you actually read any book by a biologist about evolution, it's hard to see how you could fail to be persuaded of it. I mean, the evidence is just absolutely pat. There's no doubt about it. It's not a controversial issue. It's completely certain. It's as certain as the fact that the Earth and the other planets orbit.
Even Darwin, which is the basis for the evolution theory, which I would even contest in the first place, just from a philosophical premise, because in the book Anthropic Cosmological Principle by Tipler and Barrow, they said that every stage of the evolution of the Homo sapien, the 10 stages, for example, for each stage to be true, the probabilities are 4 to the power of minus 360 to the power of minus 110,000. And that's every single stage. So it's highly improbable. So for me, if evolution is true, therefore it's a miracle, and thereby it proves God's existence.
This is the first of many academic articles I'm going to be discussing with you here today. And these aren't just some academic journals. These are, you go ask your university professor what the most prestigious academic science journals in the world are, and they're going to name the ones that I'm discussing here with you today. Okay? I'm going to read to you right now the journal Nature. Okay? There's a journal called Nature, and there's a journal called Science. Those are considered the two most prestigious overall academic science journals in the world. And I'm going to read you part of the abstract of one right now. Let me just read. Okay, this is the journal Nature, number 454, pages 362 to 363. March 18, 2010, but put online March 17, 2010. This is by a fellow named Ian Affleck, who teaches apparently in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of British Columbia. Listen to the title of this article. Solid State Physics. Golden Ratio Seen in Magnet. Okay? Okay, so let's go through this Science Daily article. ScienceDaily.com. This was released on January 7, 2010. Title of the article, Golden Ratio Discovered in Quantum World. Hidden Symmetry Observed for the First Time in Solid State Matter. Let's find out what that means. Let's read here. Researchers from Helmholtz Zentrum Berlin, and it's some German words, in cooperation with colleagues from Oxford and Bristol universities, as well as the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, United Kingdom, have for the first time observed a nanoscale symmetry hidden in solid state matter. Okay, did you catch that? This is the first time any symmetry of any sort has been observed in the nanoscale, okay, the quantum scale. Remember, quantum physics is the study of the base level energies of nature. Okay, the smallest building blocks that make up everything, little pieces of energy, like the electron or the muon or the quark. Okay, so specifically, what was found in this study was that chains of atoms lined up together form what's sort of like a string, and it resonates a frequency or pitch. What do you know? The pitch is in the ratio of 1.618, the golden ratio. Let me just read this paragraph to you. It says Science Daily, again, January 7, 2010, golden ratio discovered in quantum world. By turning the system and artificially introducing more quantum uncertainty, the researchers observed that the chains of atoms acts like a nanotech guitar string. Dr. Radu Koldia from Oxford University, who is the principal author of the paper and drove the international project from its inception a decade ago until the present, explains, here the tension comes from the interaction between spins, causing them to magnetically resonate. For these interactions, we found a series scale of resonant notes. The first two notes show a perfect relationship with each other. Their frequencies, pitch, are in the ratio of 1.618. This is just amazing. There's no defense that a random universe theorist in academia can give to counter this. There's no reason at all that the quantum base of reality should be exhibiting the specific number of the golden ratio if we live in a random universe. All the competing theories, evolution, random universe theories, all the junk from academia no longer competes in any way with intelligent design science, intelligent design theory. When you hear a scientist say on the Discovery Channel or something, an academic, a professional, say there's no evidence for intelligent design, it's all a silly little parlor game, and there's all this evidence for evolutionary science and the academic theories for the origins of the universe, you can know two things. One, we have to be compassionate because they simply don't know the empirical data. Okay? They have no idea. Academics typically only talk in their closed little worlds and only accept information from their closed little worlds. And the second thing we can know, and make no mistake about it, is they are absolutely propagandizing the world with all of their theses about the nature of the universe that we live in, where we come from, our origins, the origin of the universe, and so forth. And we realize that everything we've been taught before this point by the professionals were lies. And we can prove it up and down all over the place. Up and down all over the place. Up and down all over the place. And down all over the place.
إن كثير من علماء الأحياء وعلماء الفيزياء ممكن يكونوا ملحدين، بيقف أمامهم وبيناظرهم باستمرار علماء الرياضيات. ليه؟ لأن الرياضيات تتعامل مع الحقائق التي لا تتغير، 1 زائد 1 يساوي 2 إلى الأبد، ده الكلام ده مش هيتغير. يتعاملوا مع ما يسمى بنظرية الاحتمالات. إيه هو احتمال عدم وجود خالق؟ لا، طب تعالوا نشوف بقى حاجة أبسط من كده، وهي إن إحنا لو جبنا 12 كورة بلياردو ورقمناهم من 1 ل 12 وحطيناهم في شنطة وغمضنا عينينا ورجينا الشنطة كويس جدا، إيه احتمال إن أمد إيدي داخل الشنطة وأطلع الكرة رقم 1؟ الاحتمال 1 على 12. طيب هرجع الكرة دي وارج الشنطة كويس جدا وغمض عيني ومد إيدي وأطلع الكرة رقم 2. ايه احتمال اطلع الكرة رقم 2؟ برضو 1 على 12. كويس قوي. طب ايه احتمال اني اطلع الكرة رقم 1 والكرة اللي بعديها اطلعها تبقى رقم 2؟ الاحتمال هو 1 على 144. يعني لازم اعمل كده 144 مرة عشان مرة منهم تطلع معايا الكرة رقم 1 والكرة رقم 2. طب عارفين ايه هو احتمال اني اطلع ال 12 كورة بالترتيب؟ في كل مرة يطلع لي الكورة بالترتيب بتاعها لازم احاول 379 مليون مرة عشان اطلع ال 12 كورة بالترتيب. طيب يبقى عشان اطلع 12 كورة بالترتيب بتاعهم بهذه الاستحالة، امال ايه هو احتمال بقى اني يكون هذا الكون بكل العظم بتاعه، بكل الكبر بتاعه، بكل التنوع اللي فيه، بكل الألوان اللي فيه، بكل التناسق والتناغم اللي فيه، يكون جه من غير خالق، جه بالصدفة؟ الاحتمال هو 0. لا يمكن هذا الكلام. لذلك علماء الرياضيات هم أكثر ناس يقفوا لمن يقول بعدم وجود الخالق في هذا الكون. إذن مفيش حاجة في الدنيا بالصدفة، ونحن جئنا عن طريق الخالق الذي خلقنا. كل شيء في الدنيا له مصدر، مفيش حاجة من غير مصدر. أنا جالي واحد مرة يقول لي أنا مش مؤمن بوجود الإله. قلت أنت بتشتغل إيه؟ قال لي أنا محلل مالي. قلت له محلل مالي؟ هل تقبل في الميزانية بتاعة الشركات اللي أنت بتعمل لها تحليل مالي وجود دولار واحد من غير مصدر؟ قال لي لا. قلت له طب كويس جدا، يعني دولار واحد مش قادر تقبله بدون مصدر، وعايز الكون ده كله يكون جه بدون مصدر ازاي؟
So there's a big question if you're just kind of trying to assess how likely is it that we'd find a protein by chance with all the amino acids in that prebiotic soup interacting with each other for, say, billions of years. And I give it a lot of time. How likely is it that we'd ever get a protein to arise by chance? So I have a colleague who's been interested in the whole question of whether or not life could arise by chance for a long time. His name is Doug Axe. He's a molecular biologist. He did his PhD at Caltech. He worked for 14 years at Cambridge University, and he wanted to find out how common or how rare are the functional sequences of amino acids among the big space of all the possible amino acids there are. And he came up with a really amazing number, and it's 10 to the 74 power. So just to get the amino acid sequence properly, you've got an odds of about 1 in 10 to the 74. But there's other probabilistic hurdles that have to be overcome. If you want to build a protein, we know from chemistry that you have to attach the amino acids together with what's called a peptide bond. In nature, peptide bonds occur with about a 1 in 2 in a 1 in 2 frequency. Half the bonds that form between amino acids are peptide bonds, half aren't. But if you get any bonds forming that aren't peptide bonds, you can't form a protein. So to form a protein, 150 amino acids long, you've got a 1 in 2 chance at each site of getting the correct type of linkage. So you got 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 to the what power? Close to 150. Since we got linkages, we have 149, but call it 150, okay? So in other words, we got another huge exponential problem to overcome. So, and it turns out that 1 in 2 to the 150 is the same number as 10 to the 45th, 1 in 10 to the 45. So now we got 2 incredibly improbable things that we've got to overcome to build a functional protein by chance alone. One more problem. When you're building proteins, amino acids come in 2 flavors. There's a left-handed flavor and a right-handed flavor. They're called optical isomers, not flavors, okay? And the left-handed version is the only kind that can be used in building proteins. You get even one right-handed amino acid in there and your protein won't fold properly. So you got another probabilistic hurdle to overcome. So you've got a 1 in 2 chance at each side again, out to the 150th power. 2 to the 150th power, again, is 10 to the 45. Oh my goodness. So the odds of building even a short functional protein by chance alone is 74 plus 40. You can remember how you do this in math? You can add the exponents if you're multiplying exponential numbers.
164.
Thank you very much. Okay? Wow. Now, can anyone get their mind around a number that big? There's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the entire universe. There's only 10 to the 16th seconds since the Big Bang. There's only 10 to the 139th total events since the beginning of the universe. Now you're starting to get the understanding of why people are very skeptical that the chance hypothesis is going to do the job. Now, you may have heard just the opposite. Has anyone ever gotten in a discussion with you about the origin of life and said, hey, it happened by chance? I mean, do you hear that? I mean, this happens to me. I'll be lecturing in hostile university environments, and I'll get done and somebody say, well, but, and they want to argue with me about the probabilities. And I just shut the discussion down because I say, no serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. No serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. No serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. No serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, a messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a 2-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of the amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
Even if Miller's experiment were valid, you're still light years away from making life. It comes down to this. No matter how many molecules you can produce with early Earth conditions, plausible conditions, you're still nowhere near producing a living cell. And here's how I know. If I take a sterile test tube and I put in it a little bit of fluid with just the right salts, just the right balance of acidity and alkalinity, just the right temperature, the perfect solution for a living cell. And I put in it one living cell. This cell is alive. It has everything it needs for life. Now I take a sterile needle and I poke that cell, and all its stuff leaks out into this test tube. You have in this nice little test tube all the molecules you need for a living cell. Not just the pieces of the molecules, but the molecules themselves. And you cannot make a living cell out of them. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So what makes you think that a few amino acids dissolved in the ocean are going to give you a living cell? It's totally unrealistic.
It challenges views of life.
Yes.
That you can reconstruct it in the lab.
Yes.
That
Yes.
changes,
Yeah.
I think, views of life and even origins of life once we can really boot something up from scratch.
Yes, I love that expression, boot it up from scratch.
Yes.
That's very nice.
Yeah, we use the software analogy.
Yes.
In that,
because it is software. I mean, it's well, the whole DNA revolution shows that life is all about software, and it's just like computer tape. It's just, I mean, the chromosomes are just immensely long computer.
As science reveals the intricate construction of proteins, origin of life researchers are confronted with a difficult question. Could amino acids floating in a primordial ocean have arranged themselves into protein molecules through purely random interactions?
Obviously, it is very difficult to imagine how in the primordial oceans the amino acids could organize themselves one after another into the right sequence to form even the simplest protein. And a good way to think about this is to think about the English language and how difficult it would be to string together a meaningful English sentence by randomly placing the letters one after another.
As an illustration, consider the difficulty of forming just one line of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters randomly onto a tabletop. Only one of 26 possible letters will work correctly at each of the 30 sites in the phrase. The probability of successfully assembling Shakespeare's classic line by pure chance is determined by computing 1/26 to the 30th power. The result is a staggering 1 chance in 2,810 trillion octillion. Yet while these odds are beyond comprehension, they seem almost reasonable when compared to the probability of randomly forming just one of the simplest protein molecules known to science. The smallest proteins in nature are comprised of about 100 amino acids. These chemical components must align in specific positions along a chain. Biologists have estimated that on a planet covered by a primordial soup, filled with complete sets of all 20 types of amino acids. The time necessary to construct a functional protein of 100 units would be roughly equivalent to the oldest estimated age of the universe, multiplied by 10 to the 60th power. But despite this inconceivable time frame, even if our protein somehow correctly self-assembled, the mystery of life's origin is still far from resolved.
Let's just say that against all odds, against everything we know about science, you do get one 100 amino acid long protein by chance. What do you have? Well, you have one protein. That's it. We don't have life because even the simplest cell requires over 600 proteins in order for it to be functional, in order for it to be alive. So mainstream scientists no longer think that life and the building blocks of life could originate by chance. They're now looking for a way to explain the building blocks and explain life's organization by some form of law or combination of laws that would allow that to happen. Chance is no longer an option.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant, and when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the anthropic scientists did not want to entertain.
I think the simplest and best explanation, brothers and sisters, with the greatest explanatory power is that there is a supernatural designer. And the next point will address why God makes sense of the design of the universe. So let's go to Dawkins' second statement. Statement number 2. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. Now, let's respond to this. Now, this is not only a natural foundation, but a rational conclusion brought to light based upon the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the whole universe. Now, let me start off by presenting the premises of this argument. 1. The fine-tuning of the whole universe to permit our existence is due to physical necessity, chance, or design. 2. It is not due to physical necessity, chance, or design. 3. Therefore, it must be due to design. Now, let me explain this further. Now, brothers and sisters, the existence of a life-permitting universe is due to conditions that must have been fine-tuned to a degree that is literally incalculable, incomprehensible. Now, take the following examples into consideration. The first example, the strength of gravity and the atomic weak force. Now, physicist P.C.W. Davies has calculated that a change in the strength of gravity or the atomic weak force by only 1 part in 10 to the power of 100 would have prevented a life-permitting universe. Let's take the second example now, the Big Bang's low entropy condition. Now, Roger Penrose of Oxford University has calculated that the odds of the Big Bang's low entropy condition existing by chance are on the order of 1 out of 10 to the power of 10. Now, Penrose comments, I cannot even recall seeing anything else in physics whose accuracy is known to approach even remotely a figure like 1 in 10 to the power of 10. Now, the third example is my favorite. It's about the volume of the phase space of possible universes. Now, the same professor, Professor Roger Penrose of Oxford University, he says, in order to produce a universe resembling the one in which we live, the creator would have to aim for an absurdly tiny volume of the phase space of possible universes. Now, this may sound like scientific mumbo-jumbo, but we should ask the question, how tiny is this volume? Now, brothers, sisters, and friends, according to Roger Penrose, this volume is 1 over 10 to the power of x. And I ask you, what is x? Well, x is 10 to the power of 123. Now, this is smaller than the ratio of the proton. Now, even if you don't understand what these numbers mean, take the practical manifestation of this, which is, imagine I'm a dartsman, and I'm holding a dart and I have to hit the center of a proton. Wait a minute. If the entire universe was my dartboard. So there's only 3 possible explanations for this. 1, it's physical necessity. 2, it's chance. And 3, it's design. Well, I would argue it cannot be physical necessity because it's extraordinarily implausible. There is just no good physical reason why these constants and fine-tuning and quantities should have the values that they have. This is why P.C.W. Davies states, even if the laws of physics were unique, it doesn't follow that the physical universe itself is unique. The laws of physics must be augmented by cosmic initial conditions. Also, for us to claim that these values and this fine-tuning is just via physical necessity, it would mean that a universe to exist that could not permit life could never exist. But this is an impossibility because we have seen any slight change of these values or constants would mean that that universe would not be here at all. Now, why can't it be chance? Now, it can't be chance because we have to understand how high these chances are, how improbable it is rather. You know, for example, would we say that it's just chance if an elephant was sleeping in the garage overnight, or a 747 aeroplane ended up parked in the garden? You know, even in saying this, and I'm stuttering slightly for this because it's a bit of a joke, because even in saying this, you still have atheists who say it's still chance. And even after the irrational perspective is highlighted, they still hold on to the theory of chance. Now, in response to this, I would say that it's not just about chance. It's about something that the theorists call specified probability. Now, specified probability, brothers and sisters and friends, is a probability that also conforms to an independent pattern. Now, let me illustrate this. Now, imagine you have a monkey in your room and you leave this monkey in your room for 24 hours and you allow it to type randomly on a computer. And when you wake up in the morning, you see that printed on the table is, O Romeo, wherefore art thou, O Romeo? Deny thy father and deny thy name. Now the monkey has miraculously written out a Shakespearean sonnet. Now you may have expected random words such as house, car and apple. However, in this case, not only have you seen the improbability of typing intelligible English words, but they also conform to the independent pattern of English grammar. This is the same case with accepting that fine-tuning of the universe to permit life was just by chance. So the best conclusion, the inference to the best explanation, is that it must be design.
Some strange results have come up in about the last 20, 30 years, particularly in astronomy and also in quantum physics, which suggests that the universe actually may have a purpose, and some physicists are now suggesting it does have a purpose. And this has come out of some findings about some of the fundamental numbers in atomic physics.
During the past 40 years, scientists have determined the relative strengths of each of these primary laws and forces. These strengths are so critically balanced, they are often described as being finely tuned.
These are numbers like the mass, the weight of an electron, the weight of a quark, the strength of gravity, the strength of the electromagnetic field. About 20 numbers that describe those and other parameters, features of our world, but nobody knows why it is that those numbers have the particular values that they do. Now, you could easily say, yeah, who really cares? You change the mass of the electron by a little bit more, a little bit less. Does it really matter? And the answer is it does. See, it turns out that if you imagine that we had 20 dials right here, and we could fiddle with those 20 numbers at will, even a small change to the values of the known values of those numbers would cause the world as we know it to disappear.
Because it turns out, and this is a very surprising, unexpected discovery, that the laws of physics, the basic given fabric of the world, had to be very specific, very finely tuned, as we sometimes say, for the possibility of carbon-based life appearing at all.
For example, the strengths of the other forces are all important, the masses of the various subatomic particles. Now, this is one of a long list of properties in underlying physics that seem to be prerequisites for a universe with life. If all of these things were even a little bit different, then life, certainly life as we know it, could not exist.
It's a very surprising conclusion, but it's true, and all scientists would acknowledge that's the case.
Bernard Carr is a cosmologist and studies how the laws of physics operate in the universe. He says that the laws of nature are so finely tuned to enable complex life to exist that it is extremely unlikely that this could have happened by chance. Such fine-tuning, Carr believes, at least raises the possibility of a tuner.
This is a diagram, it's called the pyramid of complexity, and what we've got here, we've got the different levels of structure in the universe, and at the bottom we've got the things like quarks that make up the atoms, and the atoms build up to make molecules, the molecules build up to make living cells, the cells make organisms, and eventually we end up with brains and consciousness. It's rather hard to estimate what the probability is, but it was clearly very, very unlikely that those fine-tunings which allowed this pyramid of complexity to arise would be there.
A very simple and central example is the question of where does carbon come from? The very early universe doesn't make any carbon. It's very simple, it only makes simple things. Hydrogen and helium, and they're pretty boring in terms of chemistry. Now, where does carbon come from? There's only one place in the whole universe where carbon is made, and it's in the interior nuclear furnaces of the stars. We are people of stardust, made of the ashes of dead stars. And it turns out that the process by which carbon is made inside the stars is an extraordinarily delicate process. In fact, it looked at first sight as though it couldn't happen at all. It's only possible because there's a very large enhancement effect called a resonance in the trade, which makes it go much quicker than we might have expected. And that resonance is there because the laws of nuclear physics take a very specific form. If they were a little bit different, either there would be no resonance or it would be in the wrong place at the wrong energy. That's a very striking example of how finely tuned the universe has to be for us to be inhabitants of it.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question.
Ils sont nombreux à dire que finalement, quand on regarde l'univers, surtout à l'origine, eh bien, on constate qu'il ne peut pas être né par hasard, et que le hasard n'a aucun rôle, et que plus on remonte loin dans le temps, donc plus on remonte vers le Big Bang, plus on trouve un univers qui est ordonné, réglé, ajusté.
For example, if we go back to, say, 1 second after the Big Bang, at that point the expansion rate and the mass density have to have been adjusted to each other just right, so that the universe is just at this critical point. If the universe at that point were expanding just 1 part in the 15th decimal place faster, the universe would have flown apart without galaxies ever having had a chance to form. On the other hand, if the expansion rate were just a little slower than what we think by change of 1 in the 15th decimal place, then the universe would in fact have expanded to a maximum size and collapsed. We would never have even reached the time in the universe at which we're living.
Alors, ajuster comment? Eh bien, il existe ce qu'on appelle des paramètres cosmologiques. Ce sont des grandes constantes, la constante de la vitesse de la lumière, par exemple, qui fait 300 000 km à la seconde, 7 fois donc le tour de la Terre en 1 seconde. Il y a la constante de gravitation. Ce sont des chiffres, des données chiffrées, avec un zéro, une virgule, et puis parfois des dizaines de décimales derrière la virgule. Eh bien, si on changeait simplement une seule de ces décimales sur une seule de ces 20 constantes, l'univers ne pourrait pas apparaître. Eh bien, ça signifie que le hasard n'a aucun rôle à jouer à l'origine de l'univers.
How did this come about, this rather terrific luck? Of course, one of the first explanations that comes to mind is that there was a tuner or a creator, or if you like, God. And obviously for people of a theological disposition, the idea that the fine-tuning is evidence of God, of course, is wonderful.
But in fact, there may be another explanation, and that is if the energy of empty space were much bigger, see, if you put energy in empty space, it's gravitationally repulsive. It blows, it doesn't suck, okay? And that means that it's causing the current expansion of the universe to speed up, which is unprecedented, was almost unbelievable. But that means, well, and we'll talk about what it means for the future, but if the energy were much greater, then the universe would have started speeding up much earlier. And in fact, it would have started speeding up before galaxies formed. And that gravitational repulsion would have caused matter to move apart before it could collapse into galaxies. And that means there'd be no galaxies. But if there are no galaxies, there'd be no stars. If there are no stars, there'd be no planets. If there are no planets, there'd be no astronomers. And so the universe is the way it is because astronomers are here to measure it, is the argument. And it sounds funny, but it's actually maybe true. It's something called the anthropic principle, but if it's true, it means this fundamental constant in nature is an accident. And there may be many universes in which that number is different. But in those universes, there aren't people around or beings around, perhaps, to ask the question. So it addresses, in one of the fundamental aspects of the question of why is there something rather than nothing is, if there were nothing, we wouldn't be here to ask the question.
Suppose the gravitational constant was just a teeny bit weaker than it is. Well, amazingly, if it were just 1 part in 10 to the 14th weaker, than its actual value, then after the Big Bang, there would not have been enough gravitational force to result in coalescence of stars, galaxies, planets, and us. It would have been this infinitely diffused, sterile universe without the possibility of anything like life. If the gravitational constant was a tiny bit stronger, then everything would come back together a little too soon, and the Big Bang would be followed by a big crunch. Not a pretty picture, because we needed the time, of course, for life to appear, and that time would not have been offered. So here you have a really interesting circumstance where this constant, which could have had almost any value you could imagine, happens to have exactly the precise value, and a very fine tolerance indeed, that makes life possible. And that's just one of about 15 such constants, all of which, if you tinker with them, result in a universe not capable of sustaining any kind of form of life. I'm not just talking about life like we recognize it, but anything that involves complexity. And that seems to be a profound challenge to the strict atheist, although there's a way out of it. So let me tell you what the way out is. I mean, basically, you've got two options here. First of all, you cannot say this is just a coincidence. It is too unimaginably unlikely to be just a coincidence. So either there is an infinite series of parallel universes out there that we cannot measure that have different values of these constants, and of course we have to live in the one where life is possible, or we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Or you have to say that they were actually set on purpose. Now, which of those conclusions requires more faith?
So the choice hypothesis is a non-hypothesis. There is a contention to this argument though. And the contention is the anthropic principle. They're saying, look, since we're alive, we shouldn't be questioning that we're alive because we're alive. That's actually true. Why should you question that you're alive because you're alive? There's nothing to question. I'm alive. However, the anthropic principle is a misapplication. It's a misapplied argument. Because we're not saying we're questioning why we're alive. We're saying that we should question that the reason we're alive is as a result of fine-tuning. Let me give you an example. Say, Omar, he is an undercover spy and he works for ISI in Pakistan. Okay? The point I'm trying to say is imagine he was a spy and then he took me, handcuffed me, and took me to Pakistan on trumped-up drug charges, okay? This guy takes far too much testosterone or steroids or something, yeah? Whatever, yeah? And you go and you're in a court and I have no witnesses and that's it. They condemn me to the firing squad with 100 marksmen. I'm on the wall and all of you are marksmen. You've been trained marksmen. You were born with a gun. You have lasers. The bullets are laser guided if that's possible. Just imagine it's the best gun in the world, 99.99% accuracy, and you're like an inch away from me. And you have lasers on my forehead, and you hear, bang! And I'm not dead. Now, obviously I shouldn't be surprised I'm alive, because I'm alive. Obviously. But, does that mean I shouldn't be surprised I'm alive because of you guys missed the improbability of you missing? There's a difference in argument. Obviously I shouldn't be surprised I'm alive because I'm alive, but I should be surprised that the reason I'm alive is because you guys somehow missed. And that's why the anthropic argument is a misplaced argument. Do you understand that?
Obviously, if you're not a theist, and especially if you're a person who would prefer the universe to be a godless sort of universe, those are the sorts of facts that can make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So there's no shortage of persons trying to derail the argument from fine-tuning. One popular way to try and do that is to take the fine-tuning data, not so much to suggest that there's a God who made this universe, but that perhaps our universe is one of bajillions of others. If you think about a multiverse, if you think that there are jillions and jillions of universes out there, you might reason to yourself that, well, at least one of them had to turn out right. And it just so happens to be ours, lucky for us. So multiple universe theory, incidentally, you can see on the October 2005 edition of Astronomy magazine, Cover story, Why You Live in Multiple Universes. If you see all these little marble-looking things over the cover, those are literal universes, expanding much as ours is. Interesting, that cover title seems to take for granted that there actually are multiple universes. There have to be in order to get this sort of probability back up. Well, suffice to say, there's really no independent confirmation for multiple universes or for any universe other than ours. The only reason for buying into a multiple universe theory is to derail the fine-tuning argument. Some, including Oxford philosopher of religion Richard Swinburne, have said multiple universe theory represents the height of irrationality. It's an attempt to dodge a rather elegant and simple theory, namely theism, by inflating your probabilistic resources, well, to the extent of postulating bajillions of universes. When you start to increase your probabilistic resources like that just in order to avoid a pretty plausible, elegant theory, well, Bill Dembski has referred to that as the inflationary fallacy, and there's still some discussion going on with respect to the plausibility of the multiple universe theory, but probably the number one objection to it, there seems to be no independent evidence and no possibility of coming up with such independent evidence for that hypothesis in the future.
In the various ways that are conceived of these many universes existing, it's the case that they are unobservable in principle. The only universe we can observe is this one. These other universes cannot be observed even in principle.
One problem is this. Sure, you could say if there were many different universes, all with different tunings, then it wouldn't be too unlikely that our particularly fine-tuned universe exists. But for this objection to carry through, the objector actually needs to assume that it's true that there are all of these different universes. And is there any independent evidence that such universes exist? It doesn't seem to me the case that there is. I mean, sure, if you had enough monkeys typing at enough typewriters, then they could produce the works of William Shakespeare just by luck. But nobody looks at the work of William Shakespeare and goes, there must be a lot of monkeys with typewriters somewhere. In the absence of independent evidence that there is a whole typing pool of monkeys working away, everyone knows that the most rational explanation of the specified complexity of a text like Shakespeare's work is that there was a single designer who produced it intentionally. And the same thing goes for our universe.
So now we come to the second set of false alternatives, God or the multiverse. But as leading philosophers have pointed out, from a theoretical perspective, why shouldn't God be responsible for the multiverse? The notion that there is a multiverse does not per se exclude a creator. Hawking doesn't seem to mention this at all. But with the multiverse, Hawking moves out beyond science into the realm of philosophy, whose death he has announced rather prematurely. As Paul Davies points out, all cosmological models are constructed by augmenting the results of observation by some sort of philosophical principle. Now, Hawking here claiming to be the voice of modern science on the issue gives a false impression where the multiverse is concerned, since there are very weighty voices within science that do not support his view. Prominent among them, Sir Roger Penrose, Hawking's former collaborator, who shared with him the distinguished Wolf Prize. Of Hawking's use of the multiverse concept in the grand design, Penrose recently said, "It's overused. And this is a place where it's overused. It's an excuse for not having a good theory." That's an immensely strong statement, isn't it?
La densité de l'univers, par exemple, doit être réglée à une précision de 10 puissance moins 60, donc qui est égale à la précision qu'un archer doit exercer s'il voulait planter une flèche dans une cible de 1 cm², donc comme ça, tout petit comme ça, mais qui sera placé au bord de l'univers à 14 milliards d'années. À l'autre bout. Oui, c'est ça. Vous voyez, donc une précision extrême. Hein, c'est vraiment. Alors
It's the last question. Professor Dawkins, as an atheist, is it not the case that you either believe in the universe just popping into existence without a cause, which is worse than hocus pocus, or in this thing called the multiverse, which has as much independent empirical evidence as Hades controlling the underworld.
Right. The phraseology you use is somewhat biased, somewhat slanted. The universe popping into existence out of nothing, the multiverse theory is used in this context to explain the fact that some physicists believe that the physical constants are too finely adjusted. It's as though it's a put-up job. It looks as though the physical constants are so finely adjusted that if you change any one of them, then the universe would collapse. And I started to say that. Yes. Now, the multiverse hypothesis is a kind of Darwinian way of solving that. There are billions and billions of universes, all of which have different settings of their fundamental constants. A tiny minority of those billions and billions of universes have their constants set in such a way as to give rise to a universe which lasts long enough to give rise to galaxies, stars, planets, chemistry, and hence the process of evolution.
But do you understand, it does make me chuckle that you mock me for believing in a prophet that flies into a heaven, but you believe in lots and lots of universes that you can't show me, prove to me, test to me in a lab, as a basis of getting out of believing in a God and a prophet.
I'm astonished that you should compare the two.
I'm comparing the lack of evidence for the two.
Well, you cannot use your own intuitive common sense in order to diss physics. I mean, if you could do that, we wouldn't need physicists. I mean, they are very sophisticated people. They do mathematics.
But there are physicists like Paul Davies who have dissed the multiverse theory as being nonsense.
Well, Paul Davies would... There are physicists who will tell you that if you take about half a dozen physical constants, these are constants that physicists have no explanation for, they just accept that these numbers have the values that they do, and they then do theoretical calculations using their models to say if any one of these half dozen constants was ever so slightly varied, then the universe as we know it would not be possible. For example, if the gravitational constant was a little bit different, there would be no stars, there would be no galaxies, the entire universe would just be a uniform splurge of hydrogen, for example. You wouldn't have stars, you wouldn't have chemistry, you wouldn't have the formation of the heavier elements, you couldn't have life. And they do the same trick for half a dozen other physical constants. A good example is Martin Rees, the present Astronomer Royal, in his book Just Six Numbers. If the constants of the universe are indeed fine-tuned, how do we explain it? How do we explain the appearance that the universe is tuned to bring us into existence? Well, theists say God did it. God twiddled the knobs and tuned the physical constants to have exactly the right values. That, of course, is no explanation at all because it leaves unexplained the tuner. It's just pushing the problem back one step. So we can instantly discount explanation number one. Explanation number two is adopted by physicists, I think Steven Weinberg, who was quoted earlier in this conference. Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Texas, I think his view is that we don't yet understand enough physics, and when we do, when we have the longed-for theory of everything, the TOE, we will then realize that these knobs are not for tuning. There is no freedom. There are no degrees of freedom. There's only one way for a universe to be. Having accepted the word of physicists that there is an element of fine-tuning, and I've tried to lay out three possible explanations. One would be God, which, as I've said, isn't an explanation at all. One would be the multiverse, and then anthropically, with hindsight, saying we have to be sitting in one of the universes that could give us. But the third one, which I've attributed to you, possibly wrongly, would be what I call the macho physicists, who say, well, it's just that we don't understand why these things that are the way they are. One day we will, when we have a theory of everything, it will be understood. But it sounds from our conversation as though that I misrepresented you there.
I don't think one should underestimate the fix we're in, that in the end we will not be able to explain the world, that we will have some set of laws of nature. We will not be able to derive them on the grounds simply of mathematical consistency, because we can already think of mathematically consistent laws that don't describe the world as we know it. And we will always be left with a question, why are the laws of nature what they are rather than some other laws? And I don't see any way out of that. The fact that the constants of nature are suitable for life, which is clearly true, we observe.
The final idea, which I think probably most physicists at least have some time for, is the multiverse theory.
No one has constructed a theory in which that's true. I mean, it's not only a speculation. The theory would be speculative, but we don't have a theory in which that speculation is mathematically realized.
Right, yeah.
So, but it's a possibility.
And the fact that the cancellation is so precise means that the number of universes in the multiverse you need to postulate in order to anthropically be comfortable with it is very, very large.
And it must be at least 10 to the 56, or in fact,
exactly, yeah.
If you think you have some idea about fluctuations at even shorter distances, I think you would say at least 10 to the 120. In fact, that's a little disturbing.
What Dawkins does and the others do, and that is to force people to have a choice between God or science. And I want to argue in a moment or two that that is a totally false choice. But let's have a look at the logic, because the major conclusion of Hawking's book is this: because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Now, when I read that sentence, I thought, what? And then I read it again, and then I read it again, and then I spent many hours thinking about it, because this is the central conclusion and statement of the book. Well, the first obvious question to ask is, what does Hawking mean by nothing? Because his assumption, because there is a law of gravity, seems to be postulating there is something. The law of gravity certainly isn't nothing. And if he believes in a law of gravity that's prior in some sense, I presume he believes in gravity because the existence of a law on its own without the thing it's describing would be essentially vacuous. But the main point at the first level of logical analysis of this conclusion is that gravity, or a law of gravity, is not nothing. That is, if Hawking is using the word in its usual sense, philosophically correct, that is, of non-being. Now, if he isn't, he should have told us. So, It appears, at first sight at least, that Hawking is simultaneously asserting that the universe is both created from nothing and from something, which is not a very promising start. The second part of his statement, the universe can and will create itself. Now, if we say X creates Y, the meaning of those words are that we presuppose the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. That's a simple matter of the meaning of the words. So if I say X now creates X, it means I'm presupposing the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which is, of course, logically incoherent, even if we set X equal to the universe, which is precisely what Hawking does at this point. And to presuppose the existence of the universe to account for its own existence, to my mind, is something out of Alice in Wonderland, not out of science.
The point is that out of nothing, nothing comes. However, there is a contention amongst the scientific atheist community who say, no, you can have something out of nothing. Because what they say, they refer to quantum physics. I don't claim to be a quantum physicist, by the way, yeah? But let's have a conceptual understanding of what's going on here. They say in the quantum vacuum, you have subatomic particles that randomly appear. Or there are things that are happening within the quantum field that do not correspond to causality. Therefore, something can come from nothing. But it's about linguistics. What do they mean by nothing? We mean the absence of energy and matter. They mean the quantum field. And the quantum field is something. According to the philosopher of science, John Polkinghorne, he says the quantum vacuum is something. It's a rich structure, it obeys the laws of the universe, and it's a sea of fluctuating energy. So it is actually something. Also, when they claim that things can happen for no reason without any cause, is a certain view interpretation of quantum physics, which is the indeterministic view, a view that's held by people like Stephen Hawking and others, and the majority of the physicists. However, there is another interpretation, which is like the 1950s David Bohm interpretation, like the Copenhagen theory, that basically says, no, things, when they happen in the quantum field, are as a result of causes. So there are two interpretations. You don't have to hold on to one of them. So the contention from the atheist community is actually not a valid contention. It doesn't break down the argument that things can come from nothing. Also, Stephen Hawking, he's a very popular scientist, he wrote the book The Grand Design. Now, upon reading this book, in the introduction he says, philosophy is dead. And the irony is, when you read the whole book, it's full of what? It's full of philosophy. That's the irony. I just don't get these people. It's like they make the God in the morning and they eat him in the evening. Yeah? It doesn't make any sense. So he said philosophy is dead, but yet let's talk about philosophy. Anyway, he says the universe can come from nothing. But again, his definition of nothing is the quantum vacuum is actually something. So we can conclude that the first option is implausible, untenable, irrational. Something cannot come from nothing.
So we're faced with two worldviews. One starts in the beginning with mass energy, the particles, and everything is derivative, including information. The other says the exact opposite. So in the first worldview, mass energy is primary and mind is derivative. In the other worldview, mind is primary and mass energy is derivative. And so far as tonight's lecture is concerned, it is the diametrical opposition between the worldview of materialism and the worldview of theism. It is a conflict between these two worldviews, but I want you to notice there are scientists on each side of it.
Now, what's the better candidate? Now, abstract objects, the problem with these abstract objects is they're causally effete, meaning they can't cause anything. Like, for example, the number 1 can't cause anything.
The simple law of arithmetic, 1 + 1 = 2, never brought anything into being. I wish it did. It never has put any money into my bank account. If I put £1,000 into the bank today and later another £1,000, the laws of arithmetic will rationally explain how it is that I now have £2,000 in the bank. But if I never put any money into the bank myself and simply leave it to the laws of arithmetic to bring money into being, I shall be permanently bankrupt. C.S. Lewis, with usual brilliance, grasped this years ago. The laws of nature produce no events. They state the pattern to which every event, if only it can be induced to happen, must conform. Just as the rules of arithmetic state the pattern to which all transactions with money must conform, if only you can get a hold of any money. Thus, in one sense, the laws of nature cover the whole field of space and time. In another, what they leave out is precisely the whole real universe. The incessant torrent of actual events, which makes up true history, that must come from somewhere else. To think the laws can produce it is like thinking that you can create real money by simply doing sums. For every law says in the last resort, if you have A, then you will get B. But first catch your A. The laws will not do it for you. Now, scientists love developing theories involving mathematical laws to describe natural phenomena, which enable them to make predictions, and they've done it with spectacular success. But most are aware, I think, that on their own the theories and laws that they find cannot create anything, let alone a universe. Yet Hawking seems to think they did.
Professor Stephen Hawking says that modern science has established there was no need for God in the creation of the universe. In a new book, Hawking suggests that a theoretical framework known as M-theory can explain how the Big Bang was an inevitable consequence of the laws of physics.
According to him, it is the laws of physics, not the will of God, that provide the real explanation as to how the universe came into being. The Big Bang, he argues, was the inevitable consequence of these laws. I quote, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing." Now, a supernatural being, or God, is an agent who does something. Dismissing such an agent, Hawking ascribes creative power to physical law. But physical law is not an agent. Hawking, it seems to me, is making a classical category mistake by confusing two entirely different kinds of entity, physical law and personal agency. Our physical laws are a description, usually mathematical, of what normally happens under certain given conditions. This is surely obvious from the very first example that Hawking gives in his book. The sun rises in the east. But this law does not create the sun, nor the planet Earth with east and west. It is descriptive and predictive, but not creative. Similarly, Newton's laws of gravitation doesn't create gravity or the matter in which gravity acts. In fact, it doesn't even explain gravity, as Newton himself realized. But it's even worse. The laws of physics cannot even cause anything to happen. Newton's celebrated laws of motion never caused a pool ball to race across the table. That can only be done by people using a pool cue and the action of their muscles. Suppose, to make matters clearer, we replace the universe by a jet engine, and we are asked to explain it. Shall we account for it by mentioning the personal agency of its inventor, Sir Frank Whittle? Or shall we, following Hawking, dismiss personal agency and explain the jet engine by saying it arose naturally from physical law? Now, this would be absurd. It is obvious we need both levels of explanation in order to give a complete description. It is also obvious that the scientific explanation neither conflicts nor competes with the agent explanation. They complement one another. It is the same with explanations of the universe. God does not conflict or compete with the laws of physics as an explanation. God is actually the ground of all explanation, in the sense that he is the ultimate cause in the first place of there being a world for the laws of physics to describe. Now, there's more to this, because the laws of physics can explain how the jet engine works, but not how it came to exist in the first place. Jet engine needed the intelligence and creative engineering work of Whittle. Indeed, come to think of it, the laws of physics plus Frank Whittle could not actually produce a jet engine on their own. There also needed to be some material, subject to those laws that could be worked on by Whittle. Matter, ladies and gentlemen, may be humble stuff, but it is not produced by laws. I submit to you that the world of strict naturalism, in which clever mathematical laws all by themselves bring the universe and life into existence, is pure science fiction.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence suggests that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable, observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming.
Hi, science will set you free. I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God because there is no evidence of his existence. I know why you believe in God. You believe in God because you don't know how things were formed. When you see anything, you say, "Oh, God made that." That shows how short-sighted and ignorant you are. You attribute it to God because you don't want to find any other explanation for its existence. You believe in God due to your ignorance. And if there is a God, then who created this God? Well, I really respect you, but I don't agree with what you have said. Do I believe in God because I don't know any other explanation for creation than I attribute it to God? Actually, no. I base my belief in God on knowledge. How? When you see something such as camera, oh come on, this is an old argument. Please let me continue answering you, then you can say what you want. Okay. When you see something such as camera, do you say that camera was designed by someone or was it through a very slow process? Common sense says it was designed by someone. I can't say you are lazy if you would say it was designed by someone because you don't want to think or use your mind. There can't be any other explanation except it was designed by someone. That's what I'm talking about. You base what you know on knowledge. According to life experience and common sense, order doesn't spontaneously arise from chaos. The more complex and ordered the system, the more functional the form, the greater level of intelligence behind it. You agree with me, don't you? Yeah, I agree. When we look at any camera, we know it contains plastic, glass, etc. And we know it all comes from sand and oil. If you found this camera in the desert, can you say this camera came from billions of years of random events? No. Why? As we agreed, order doesn't spontaneously arise from chaos. Good. So what about the origin of the first cell? It's by very slow process. Okay, now let's see if random events or a very slow process could produce one cell or even one protein. Protein consists of amino acids, and there are more than 250 varieties of amino acids in natural. Only 20 are found in the living organisms. The selected amino acids in protein must be left-handed, not right-handed. After the proper amino acids have been selected in the correct amounts, they need to be arranged in a particular sequence for protein to be formed. After arranging in the correct sequence, the selected amino acids must be joined together with a peptide bond. If the process I just told you about doesn't occur, then amino acids won't form a protein. I'll try to make it simple for you to understand by giving you an example. Let's say we have 20 blind men, each with a deck of playing cards. And what we want are 200 playing cards in the correct order, which are a total of 1040 playing cards. The correct order is Ace, 2, 3, 4 up to the 10 of hearts for each blind man. And give each blind man one deck of cards after you're done shuffling them. Then let each blind man to lay out the playing cards in the correct order. What is the chance that one blind man lay out the 10 cards in the correct order? It's quite unlikely, but yet. It's not impossible. Okay, what if there were 2 or 3 blind men? Still not impossible. What if there were 15 or 20 blind men? That's impossible! But let's say that a miracle had occurred and those 20 blind men laid out the playing cards in the correct order. The issue is that those 20 blind men won't be able to know if they laid out the playing cards in the correct order or not. They have no goal or a purpose behind laying out the playing cards. I mean, nothing will stop them if they approach to the correct order because they don't know if they are doing it right. They'll continue. And the same idea applies to amino acids when they come together to form a protein. The deck of cards are like the various amino acids, and the 200 cards in the correct order like the 200 amino acids in the correct order that form the proteins. And blind men are like the random conditions that would assemble the amino acids to form a protein. What will maintain the correct order of amino acids when they approach to the precise order? Well, there is a natural law which controls the order of things. For example, I can't program a software program on the computer which can't direct the playing cards to be in the correct order. But your program has been designed by you. It was designed to choose a certain playing cards that gives us the correct order and to maintain the correct order. So, who wrote this natural law that recognizes and chooses the required amino acids in the exact order and maintains the complex organization of the amino acids? Remember, order doesn't spontaneously arise from chaos. So, the first issue is the impossibility of this grouping in the correct order. The second issue is amino acids are unaware whether they approach the correct order or not. And the third issue is maintaining this in the correct order and also recording the details into code and copying them, then again copying them. Could the very slow process produce such a law like that? Russian scientist Alexander Operin said, "The spontaneous formation of such an atomic arrangement in the protein molecule would seem as improbable as the accidental origin of vowels and need from scattered letters." And all what we are talking about right now is only one protein. All these complexities are only in one protein. How complex do you think a cell that contains hundreds of proteins is?
أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون.
Now, let's escape to the biggest issue, which is consciousness. Think for a while of a piece of clay in front of you. Do you think that given 1 trillion years or infinite time that this clay could suddenly or even gradually become conscious and aware of its surrounding and identity the way you are? It could never happen. And the same goes for any kind of matter. It could never become aware, never think, but you position is that. Are you talking to me, mate? No, I mean, you're talking to me, don't you? Yeah, you. Consciousness can't be something materialistic or physics. It's something different. When you dream, you see some things you didn't choose to see, and it seems like reality. Could all these skills come from the materialistic brain? No. The physicist Leonard Maladno, in an interview in the CNN channel, he brought up this point and said,
"There's no physics explanation. In fact, there's no physics explanation for consciousness, and as far as I can tell, I've never seen consciousness even defined in a way that the scientists can really deal with."
Also, Richard Dawkins, the most popular atheist and the hero for many atheists, he was asked, "What's the one question you want to most see answered?" He said,
"How does subjective consciousness work? How does it evolve? And what's going on? When I have my own private feelings and you have your own private feelings, what happens when I see something red? What is it that makes the redness? What is it that makes the smell of onions? What is it that gives the subjective sensation that I know I have and I suspect you have, but I can never know what's going on inside your head?"
Talking of Richard Dawkins, Ben Stein in his documentary Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, he interviewed Richard Dawkins and he asked him about the possibility of the intelligent design. He answered,
"It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
He said, designer.
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
Yes, Dawkins. This designer is higher intelligence. This designer is nothing like unto him. This designer must be different from his designs. If that design or creation is dependent, the creator must be self-sufficient. And if that creation is finite, the creator must be eternal. And if that creation is confined by space and time, the creator must be free of it. We can see that Dawkins has an issue with the mystery of where did this designer come from. In the other words, who designed the designer, or who created God? Well, this is a flawed question in my opinion. Why? Designer has his own attributes and the designs have their own attributes. And you are here mixing and confusing the attributes of the designer with the attributes of the designs. For example, I made this ball. Here, I'm the designer and this ball is the design. My attributes, I feel, think, see and sleep. Ball doesn't have these attributes. You can't claim that ball think or feel. And you can't associate the attributes of ball with me. The ball doesn't have the ability to comprehend what I feel or think because its attributes are limited. And the designer has superior attributes than the design. I'll repeat the example, but I'll replace the word me with the word God. And replace the word ball with the word me. God made me. God is the designer and I'm the design. God's attributes are self-sufficient, eternal, and not confined by space and time. I don't have these attributes, and you can't claim that I am eternal or self-sufficient. You can't associate my attributes with God. I don't have the ability to comprehend or imagine that God has no beginning, because my attributes are limited, and the human mind can't comprehend everything. This is something beyond our grasp.
هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم.
I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and I bear witness that Jesus is the servant of Allah and his messenger.